welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast. My name is John, and with me, as always, this morning is Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Good morning.
We're all about talking about Star Wars racing games today. That's the thing. So this one's gonna be a little bit video game focused, or I guess completely video game focused, but specifically racing games. And I would say this is continuing our focus this year on celebrating the Phantom Menace with so many other Star Wars fans who are excited about the Phantom Menace this year. Because we're going to talk a lot about pod racing games, because those are the best Star Wars racing games. But real quick, before we get into that, I just wanted to talk about some Daisy Ridley press stuff that's been going around, because I've seen some goofy headlines, and I also found what I thought was a pretty fun little excerpt from a vulture.com interview here. So I want to talk about that real quick, just to get a little episode 9, kind of talk in before we jump into these Star Wars racing video games. So Ryan, have you seen Daisy Ridley like on any late night shows or anything like that? Because she kind of did the rounds this week. She has a new movie coming out.
Yeah, she's been rapping and doing all sorts of stuff.
Okay, I haven't seen the rapping, but so is that a yes you saw, or you've just seen some clips here?
I've just seen it like on Twitter.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw some moments here and there, not too much, but there's some stuff going around, and I saw a headline pop up in my Apple News app about how Daisy Ridley's comments in interviews this week might have given away a huge spoiler for episode 9 and other such obnoxious, ridiculous takeaways from these interviews. And people have been trying to, make headlines out of nothing, basically. But like I said, there's a quick little vulture.com interview that Daisy did, which I think is actually has some good stuff in it, and the author did not attempt to turn it into something it isn't, so I appreciated that as well. So 3 questions here real quick. The first says, in the new Star Wars trailer, we see you and Carrie Fisher embracing a tear running down your face. I know that scene was compiled using unused footage from The Force Awakens, but do you remember the original context of that moment? And this response from Daisy I found really interesting. She said, I do. It's not a million miles away from what that scene is. It was very sad, and I found it very moving to watch because I do remember the original, and it's a strange thing to do for someone that's not around anymore to be brought back to life. It's eerie that it resonates so much with what the story is this time. It's pretty amazing. So I don't know. I thought that a couple things about that were really interesting. One, the fact that the scene as it played or as it was shot for The Force Awakens is pretty similar, it sounds like, according to Daisy, to the scene in The Rise of Skywalker, which, I mean, I guess that's not surprising because you're taking footage of somebody that acted a scene for a different movie and trying to insert it into this new movie. So it would probably kind of need to be pretty similar, or maybe it wouldn't work, I guess. But it does send my mind kind of spinning in terms of like, well, what kind of scene would that be, and what was going on there. So I think that's pretty interesting. And I guess too, just the idea there at the end that for her, she thinks it resonates, that scene as it was shot. I'm assuming she means that scene as it was shot in The Force Awakens really resonates with what's going on in the story this time around too. So, you think about, well, what would have caused this embrace between Daisy and Rey? Would it have been a discussion of Han Solo and what happened to Han? And does that mean that in some way, kind of Han and the significance of Han and his death is going to come back around? Could it have been about, just like surrogate mother type thing? Like, hey, you've gone through so much and you don't have a mom, and I am a mom, but, my son is gone, that sort of thing. That would make a lot of sense as well. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know what the original thrust of that scene was when they shot it for The Force Awakens, but I think it's pretty cool that it sounds like it's a moving thing and a pretty emotional thing, and I'm just, I'm so I mean, as we all are, obviously, but I'm just so curious to see kind of what happens with Carrie and Princess Leia in The Rise of Skywalker, and I'm really excited to see more with Rey and Princess Leia, even if that is coming from kind of previously shot sequences and stuff like that. I'm really excited to see how they're going to bring those two characters together in this movie, and what kind of interactions they will have.
Yeah, yeah, and like what Daisy said here is just like reinforcing what JJ had mentioned. Like, just it just so happens that we have this footage that totally works, and it's weird and eerie, and no one can believe it, but it's there and it works, and that's really fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Not very entertaining, very funny to me is what Carrie did during the scene. Which, this is crazy. Like, if I'm Daisy Ridley and I'm trying to shoot this scene with this legend, Carrie Fisher, and it's supposed to be this emotional thing, and there's tears involved and all that. The interviewer asked Daisy, "Do you remember how you and Carrie discussed playing the scene?" And she says that Carrie, she was actually whispering, "This is an effing long hug." I was trying to do my acting like, "Oh my God, Carrie." There wasn't any discussion about what we were going to do, but I can just totally see Carrie Fisher, they're having this moment and she's whispering in her ear like, "Oh my God, this is taking so long."
Yeah.
and doing a little bit of that trademark swearing and stuff. So that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other question, before we move on to our actual topic here, the other question is about future Star Wars movies. Surprise, surprise. And it says, when you look ahead at the Disney calendar, there's new Star Wars movies planned every other year until 2027. Carrie and so many other Star Wars stars continued to appear in the franchise as long as they could. Do you imagine yourself doing so if you're given the chance? And Daisy responds, "I can't actually imagine it right now. The ending to The Rise of Skywalker, it's very satisfying. It felt like an end. I don't know what'll happen in however many years. There are so many characters in the Star Wars world who have never been explored. There's so much for the filmmakers to work on. So right now, I don't think so. But who could say, really? An opportunity might present itself. I love how the movie hasn't come out and people are like, what about going forward? Right now, it feels like a really nice full stop on the Skywalker series." So, a couple things at play here. One is an actor who would like to be known for other things and would like to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
other things, and is doing an interview about her new movie Ophelia, and is being asked about Star Wars. And yeah, I mean, I think that Daisy is probably excited to not have any Star Wars movies that she's obligated to do going forward, so that she can do other things, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. And I think that's part of this. But then the other thing too, according to Daisy, is that the Rise of Skywalker really does feel like a complete ending to the Skywalker saga, which they keep telling us that. So it's not a surprise, but it's cool to hear. Or I guess it's good to know that to the people involved, it feels like we didn't just make the third movie and then we're deciding to stop making them now, but that they really, the movie is going to feel very much like the ending of this sort of part of the Star Wars saga.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I bring this up because, like I said, I've seen headlines say, "Oh my God, I think I think Daisy, I think Daisy, I don't know what kind of ship that one is, but I think Daisy just gave away that she dies, that Rey dies in the Rise of
Oh,
Skywalker."
what?
Oh yeah, because not because of this answer, but a similar answer where she was like, "Nah, that'd be really weird with the way this movie ends or whatever." I don't know what she said,
Mm-hmm.
but something like that, and people are, of course, turning it into a headline or whatever. But it's like, number one, she's like Luke Skywalker. It doesn't matter if she dies or she doesn't die. Like, she could always come back in another movie. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's Star Wars.
yeah, well, it's Star Wars, and she's like one of these, she's the heroic Force user character, the Jedi, whatever. Like, she can come back. So I think it's disingenuous in the first place to try to turn that into something it's not, just based on that fact alone. But also, yeah, I mean, all these actors signed up to do a trilogy of Star Wars movies, and that trilogy is ending. So if they say, yeah, I don't really think that we'll be doing more, or that we're coming back or anything like that, like, that's not a headline. That's not anything, it's just reality, and what I would expect them to say, regardless of what happens with their characters in the movie. But it is good to know, like I said, that that the movie's going to feel like a really nice full stop, as Daisy says,
Mm-hmm.
on the Skywalker series. So very exciting times.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Speaking of exciting, thrilling times, let's talk about some Star Wars racing games. Um, well, I mean, we're going to talk about Star Wars racing games, but for the most part, we're talking about Episode One Racer or offshoots of Episode One Racer, which is great because that's like one of the best Star Wars games, period, and definitely, of course, the best Star Wars racing game as well. So let's jump in. You ready, Ryan?
Ready.
All right, cool. So, Episode One Racer is, of course, a tie-in Star Wars game that was released alongside the Phantom Menace, and it was developed by LucasArts, and it came out in May of '99. Which, the Phantom Menace came out in May of '99, so this thing was ready to launch. Boom! Right then, when the movie came out, and it came out on the PC and on the N64 in May of '99. Ryan, do you remember? Were you playing? Were you playing Episode One Racer in May of '99?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely was.
Okay.
Yeah, I had pre-ordered it from Media Play, and got a free T-shirt for pre-ordering. It was a white T-shirt with the logo on it, and yeah, I was very excited for this game. This would also be like a time period where I was playing a lot of Nintendo 64. I was a dual owner at this point. I had a PlayStation and an N64. But yeah, this was like the comeback time for, because it was a little sketchy on the release front for N64 for a while there, but a few months before this, in November of '98, we got Zelda Ocarina of Time. And then also in the holiday season, we got Rogue Squadron for N64. So like there was a lot happening on the N64 front. It was a very active system for me, and I was excited to pay the $70 or whatever to get a new N64 game, especially a new Star Wars one. And it was a little different because this was kind of the first pure Star Wars racing game that we had gotten. And we all knew about the pod race going into Episode One, but there was there may have been some apprehension from some people, like, why do we need a Star Wars racing game? Like, Star Wars is about lightsabers and space battles. But I don't know. I was really excited for it. I guess because it was tied into Episode One, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I pre-ordered and bought it pretty blind going into it, and I think like at this point, the LucasArts had, in my opinion, a great track record of Star Wars games on N64. There had been some disappointments on like other platforms. On PS1, we had Terrace Kasi and Rebel Assault 2, some kind of like iffy Star Wars games up to that point. But on N64, we had Shadows of the Empire, which we love. Maybe not the most critically well received Star Wars game, especially in retrospect, but I love that game. And then Rogue Squadron was just inarguably great. So yeah, I had no qualms pre-ordering and buying Episode One Racer blind. How about you?
It's really weird because, much of what you just said holds true for me too. Like, huge into the N64 at that time. That was my primary console. I loved it. I mean, enormously pumped about the Phantom Menace, of course. And, Yeah, the only thing I can think of is I must have been broke at the time coming out of Star Wars Celebration and trying to buy as many movie tickets as I could to go to the Phantom Menace that summer because I didn't buy it for N64 that summer. And I don't know why. And there was a Dreamcast port that came out in, I think, April of 2000. No. I think it was August of 2000. I've got an incorrect date here in the show notes. But anyway, I got the Dreamcast version of the game, but that wasn't until the following year. So why I didn't play it for an entire year, I don't know. But I mainly played it on Dreamcast. Now Dan had it on N64 and Chris Stevens had it on N64 and stuff. So like maybe that's why I didn't get it, just because I was playing it, at friends' houses or something. But yeah, I was playing it at least a little bit around that time, just with friends. But never got my own copy until Dreamcast came out. So there is the PC version, the N64 version, there's the Dreamcast version, and then also there's a Game Boy Color version that came out at the end of 1999, which is pretty cool. Very different, of course. And then the arcade game as well, which we'll talk about later on. So, yeah, and I think for a lot of people, anyway, the N64 version, kind of for some of the reasons you were just talking about, is really like the primary version of the game. I mean, I think the PC one is probably the more technically advanced version of the game, or at least it was on a, digital media instead of a cartridge, or I guess an optical media. They're both digital, but an optical media. And so there was some stuff featured there, like more, I don't know if you call them like cutscenes or FMV. They're not really FMV though, because they're rendered. But whatever. There's like video, movie, cinema sequences in the PC and Dreamcast versions that are not in the N64 game. And the audio is definitely not on par in the N64 version either. But it's still, I think, is the way that the most people played this game, and the way that the most people remember this game, I think, is as an N64 game. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One, I think there is just that like N64 Star Wars legacy, where I think there's just some great classic Star Wars games on the N64. Like N64 was the console you bought if you wanted to play Star Wars games, unless you were on PC or whatever. But as far as home consoles go, during that era, I would definitely say N64 was the Star Wars system. There was also a hardware bundle for Episode 1 Racer. There was an N64 system. I believe the N64 system is just like a standard gray and black console, but it had the Episode 1 Racer cart packed in. And it came in a special box. Something I've always been envious of, and I would love to have in my collection, just because that box is so awesome. It's just like a really slick, giant black box with the Racer logo on it. Yeah, even kind of going back and replaying a lot of Star Wars racing games and stuff for this episode, it just feels right on N64, and I haven't played it on PC or Dreamcast, which is weird. I never got the Dreamcast port because I was a huge Dreamcast fan, in the early 2000s for sure. Like, the Dreamcast kind of became a primary console for me for a while, but I never got it on Dreamcast. And I think I was just so satisfied with the N64 version. And, there is the benefit of on N64, like not having load times. And this was a 2-player split screen game, and I think the N64 was also a lot of people's primary multiplayer system, between like GoldenEye and Smash and Mario Kart and stuff. So like it was a good multiplayer game as well.
It was the fun machine.
Well, yeah,
it was the fun machine. Yeah. So
yeah, Yeah,
For people who aren't nerds about this stuff, that was one of the taglines for the N64 was the fun machine. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean N64 was essentially like PlayStation, but for people with friends.
Ooh,
And
shots fired. Wow.
but
Yeah, but
no,
it
I
did not
mean,
have it. It had zero wicked clowns like sticking out of the top of a car, shooting flames at people, and didn't have any of that kind of wicked stuff like that.
well,
So
no, like I mean, for me, like the PS1 was like the RPG system. That's where I would sit, like in my mom's basement and play, Squaresoft games by myself for like entire weekends. Like that was like the sad boy system. But like N64, like you were saying, like it was the party system. It was the fun machine. Like
yeah, Mario Kart and GoldenEye and Smash Brothers and all that stuff.
Mario
Yeah.
Party, like so much. But yeah, so like I think the 2-player split screen in there, unfortunately it was not 4-player, which I think would have even bumped up the love for that version even more, had it been. But yeah, like I also just think just playing it, like it just feels so good playing with that N64 controller and like that analog stick, and it just feels like everything was built around that stick. It's the same way I kind of feel about playing Mario 64 or the Zelda games on N64. Like I've played those on a bunch of platforms. They still just feel best on N64. I think like everything is just configured so perfectly around that controller and that stick, that, not every game worked on N64, but the games that did work, like really worked. And I feel like Racer feels perfect. And I noticed that when I was playing Racer Revenge, which we'll talk about later, like I didn't have that, like it's almost like it's like a metaphysical concept, that like connection between the controller and the game. Like it's like midi-chlorians or something, because like it just feels right. It's definitely the force. But yeah, I absolutely love playing Racer on the N64. I've played a bunch of it yesterday on the system, and it's still just such a fun game. Like yeah, it's N64, the textures are blurry. You mentioned the audio. I think in a way it's kind of cool how there isn't music in the N64 version, because so I have my N64 hooked up to an old TV, and I have a sound bar. So the game does support Dolby sound, um, Dolby Surround, if you're so inclined, which is a cool feature for an N64 game. But I have a sound bar, and so like I was like bumping it yesterday while playing this game, and um something that like I've really come to appreciate about the pod racing sequence in episode 1 is just the way that it's like totally sound effect driven. And it's so much of Star Wars is enhanced and driven by like the John Williams score, but in this case like it's pure sound effect. And it's and the N64 version like kind of brings that feeling, and I think the sound design is really really strong in it. So like if you play this game and turn it up, like it's great, and it feels very authentic to the movie sequence.
Cool. Yeah, no, I can see that, and I think it's the whole first lap of the pod race has no music in it.
Mm-hmm.
So even in the movie, so Yeah, that's a glass half full way of looking at that situation. I would say on the Dreamcast version, it's pretty great to hear that John Williams music, and especially at the time, to have that soundtrack, straight from the Phantom Menace. It kind of just edits together, like some of the best parts of the Phantom Menace soundtrack into the soundtrack of Racer. So that's pretty cool too, I will say. But yeah, no, I can definitely see the argument for, kind of the impact of just hearing those sweet, sweet pod racing sounds. So that's cool. Real quick, the N64 version does also make use of the expansion pack optionally,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not required, like some games are, but you can enable high-res textures if you have the expansion pack. So I'm assuming you had it, Ryan, and that you have it now, right? I mean, you're not
Yes.
playing this thing with low-res textures, right?
No.
Okay.
But there's something, there's something to always be careful of when you're using the expansion pack on the N64. Sometimes when you enable those high-res textures, you get a lower frame rate in some games. And I didn't take the time to, check both ways on this game to see if if there was like a noticeable feeling in the frame rate, going between the modes. But I did keep the high res textures on, and I thought it felt very, very smooth the whole time. I'm not sure if, Digital Foundry or someone would have to like go in and like do all the comparisons and stuff, which would be awesome to actually see. But no, like I thought it felt great and really smooth and really fast, even with those high res textures enabled, which is hilarious to talk about high res textures on in N64, where it's like a 240 interlaced resolution. But I still think it looks good and leaves enough to the imagination. So
yeah. No, it looks great. Cool. Well, let's talk about the gameplay of Episode One Racer, which obviously is the most important part. And basically, there are 8 planets on which you can race a pod. One of which is Tatooine, and that whole thing is so kind of the Boonta Eve, classic. It's like so faithfully recreated. I feel like it really like it looks fantastic, by the standards of the day. But as far as going to see that movie in '99 and then coming home and like reliving the podcast sequence, like between the design and the look of that planet and that course, and then like the audio design, like you said, and all that, like it really did feel, I think, like a pretty close approximation of the pod race from the movie. So that's pretty great. The other 7 planets, of course, not in the Phantom Menace or anywhere else. So these are planets that are, I think, pretty much created, the visual design created for Episode One Racer. There maybe 1 or 2 of those planets would have been, I mean, maybe in like books and stuff, but even at that time there was no Star Wars cartoons or really any other visual medium in which I can imagine they would have been kind of produced before, right? So I would think this would be the first time that we'd really seen, maybe outside of like a comic book or something, any of these planets. I'm sure some of them were probably created just for, maybe all of them were created just for Episode One Racer. I don't know, but
yeah, they're probably in the tabletop RPG.
Okay, yeah,
everything's in the tabletop RPG.
Okay. All right, yeah. But no, so you end up, you have like pretty much like circuits. I think they're called tournaments, because that's like the main sort of single player game is tournament play or something. It's called tournament. So yeah, they have an arrangement of those 8 planets and the courses from those 8 planets. And it's been a long time since I played this game, so I was playing it this week on the Dreamcast, and I'm looking at like, okay, so the easy tournament or whatever. Let me do that one first. And I went through and got first place on every, course. I mean, no big deal or whatever, but it's actually kind of boring on the easiest mode because I was playing it and it really just sort of felt like I was doing a time trial or, something like that. Like I never even saw anybody else once the race started sort of thing,
Yeah.
But then I got to the next difficulty level or the next tournament up and saw that it was largely like all the same planets. And I was sort of thinking to myself, oh, wait a minute, like, have I really already done everything except for just, lower difficulty? But when you race on those planets, like the courses are different. It's not just exactly the same thing you've already done. I mean, I'm sure sometimes they recycle and it is the same, but just because you see the same planet listed, like, oh, I'm going back to Malastare, that doesn't mean that's the only version of Malastare, the only track on Malastare. So I thought that was actually really cool. But that's basically what the single player gameplay is. It's you have these tournaments and they have 8 races each, and the planets are the same between circuits. I mean, there are some planets that aren't in the first one. Maybe is it 6 races? I don't know, but anyway, no. What it is, there's 8 races I think in every tournament, and there's 8 planets in the game. But in some of the tournaments, you'll go to the same planet more than once, which I thought was weird too. And then I was like, oh, okay, I see that the courses are different. So you go to the same planet more than once, but then there's, I think, 2 planets that aren't seen in the first. I should have taken more detailed notes on this, but essentially that's what it is. It's like 8 planets, different races for different tournaments and that sort of thing. But yeah. And I remember that the game was really hard towards the end. I didn't really try any of the like super difficult tournaments this time around, but I do remember because our friend Chris, he put some serious time and effort into like besting this game and finishing, first place in every tournament and all that kind of stuff. And he did it, but it was like he mastered this game, and he spent a lot of time playing it so that he could master it even at the most difficult levels. And that was not an easy task.
Yeah. He's the only human who could do it.
Yeah, I mean that is one kind of fun thing about this game is that Anakin, of course, is maybe you could say the primary character, or at least the most well known character there in the game. That's who I was raced as. Although one of the fun things about the game is how many different characters there are, and you can actually play as Orty Mandrell and Sebulba and all these different pod racing characters from the movie, most of whom you just saw like a little snippet of or whatever, and you don't know anything about them. And then in this game, they can be your hero. You can play as all these ridiculous characters, so that's fun. But no, the idea that Anakin is like as a slave boy at 10 years old or whatever is traveling all over the galaxy and racing in all these exotic locations is kind of funny too.
Yeah. And something else about playing like the tournament mode of the game is you earn money depending on how you finish. And the currency in the game is not galactic credits because you have to you buy upgrades from Watto's shop. But it's like, what is it? What is the currency called? It's like Tuggerts or something.
Yeah, Oh, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, whatever, but you get, obviously more money after a race depending on like where you finish. So if you're finishing first, you're getting more money, and you can only earn money for first place once. So like when I was playing yesterday, I was like, oh, I should just try to go to like an easy track on an easy difficulty and just like play that a few times so that I can buy all the upgrades. But you can't do that. So you actually, when you're playing, you have to be really intentional and thoughtful about how you're upgrading your pod racer, because there's a lot of different options. Like you can update the cooling or the traction or the acceleration or the top speed, but you can really only do about one upgrade per every 1 or 2 races because that's all the money you earn. So I think that adds like an interesting dynamic to it. And there's probably like a right way to do it to, get your ship the best it can be by spending the least amount of money. But yeah, I think that's kind of a cool dynamic to the game.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's another thing I have in the notes here too. Is just how much there is kind of like extra stuff, fun stuff outside of just the racing because it is one of those things where you get a single player. I mean, it's not a single player game; it's a multiplayer racing game. But how much fun are they? When it's just single player, and I think episode one racer it was really fun single player. I thought. And like when I got on a Dreamcast, I mostly played single player. And like I said before, the difficulty of trying to kind of become as good as you could at the game, definitely added a lot of replayability to it. And I love Mario Kart games. Obviously, those are like my favorite racing games, and I love Mario Kart games. But even on the hardest difficulty level in Mario Kart, you feel a lot of times like luck has as much to do with not luck, but like that um, you're either going to get first place if you're good at Mario Kart. You're either going to get first place like on 150cc, or the AI is going to do something goofy to kind of hose you or whatever towards the end, and then you're not going to get
Mm-hmm.
first place. But I feel like usually with a Mario Kart game, like I am plenty good at Mario Kart to get first place on any course, unless some banana peel type thing happens to me when it shouldn't, and then I lose. But
Mm-hmm.
with this game, when you got to the like really difficult stages of it, I feel like you just have to be perfect or you're not going to get first place. And that's not really the case in some other racing games. So I think as far as like single player goes, is it fun to keep playing the game single player? For that reason, I think it is. But also, there's just like there's a lot of like little customizable things and little extra stuff, I guess, like walking around the junkyard and, you can look, you can inspect your pod and you can, do these, like, go into the junkyard and look at these parts while Watto's following you around and stuff. And it doesn't necessarily add a lot of content, but it's just kind of fun. Like in terms of it's summer of 99, I want to play a game that's going to really help me relive the experience of the Phantom Menace or a part of it. And there's a lot of little, I don't know, bonus elements to the game that I think go a long way in terms of just giving you a kind of a complete sort of, Phantom Menace video game experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, like, on the topic you just mentioned of like, this is a game that, and you mentioned Chris had done this. And I feel like I did to an extent back in the day, but it really is a game where you just need to learn it and perfect it. And you just have to be like patient and willing to, you know, really, really learn the tracks, and then, have the patience to just keep trying until you get that perfect run. And I think like that's kind of a trademark of this like subgenre of racing games. Like you mentioned briefly like kart racing games like Mario Kart, and we'll talk a little bit more about kart kart racers in a bit here. But I think Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is cut from the sci-fi racing genre, which I think the most famous games in that genre are Wipeout on like the PlayStation side primarily, and then F-Zero on the Nintendo side. And we did get a very good F-Zero game on N64, F-Zero X, and something about like these games is like you really just have to, again, learn the courses and then get that perfect run, which is very hard to do once you get up to those higher speeds. And, um, sometimes the AI can be like very aggressive. There's not like items that, there's not turtle shells or like whatever the equivalent would be here. But the, the AI can be aggressive in like ramming you. So yeah, I think it is just, having that patience and skill to get that perfect run. And I think that's what you aspire to when you're playing one of these games.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, should we move on to talking about the arcade version of Episode One Racer?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, arcade version. It's awesome. I don't really remember playing it that much. Summer of '99 or whenever it came out. I think '99. Um, in the arcade, arcades weren't necessarily a huge thing at that point in time. Well, they just weren't really a huge thing at that point in time. I mean, more so than they are now. At least for kids anyway, because actually arcades have made a little bit of a comeback in the last 5 to 10 years with barcades and that sort of thing. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, this is early '90s, mid '90s. I think arcades were huge. By '99, I think they were dying off. That's right, isn't it, Ryan? I just said that, and then I was like, well, I don't know, maybe they were still pretty big at that time, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They were big if you were into certain things. Like it was still where like fighting games debuted.
mhm.
So if you wanted to play like Virtual Fighter 3 or Street Fighter 3, like uh, you know, that was pretty huge. Also, the music games
Like
were
DDR
getting,
and
yeah,
yeah,
and that's what kind of got me back into arcades, was the combination of in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was Virtual Fighter 3 and 4 and Dance Dance Revolution, which is kind of what kept me in the arcades post Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat boom of like the mid 90s.
yeah. But I'm thinking like in the town that we grew up in, right? Like
Hmm.
in the early to mid '90s, we had two game factories, and we had at least like one arcade in the mall. I think at one point we had two arcades in the mall, right? But and then obviously pizza places and different like mini putt joints and stuff like that would have arcade machines. But I'm trying to think like by that time, like 2000, like '99, 2000, like where were the arcade games? There was probably still one arcade in the mall, I guess, at that time. The game factories were closed. I'm just like, where did you play DDR
Yeah.
and stuff?
So I would go to Schaumburg to GameWorks.
Okay. So see, that's what
Yeah.
I mean. Like, okay, they were dying off
Yeah.
then. If we had to like drive an hour away from our house to go to an
Yeah.
arcade, I
Yeah.
would say
Yeah.
they were kind of dying off at that point, at least in comparison. But I'm sure some movie theaters probably had the Episode One Racer arcade game. And it was still a time like it wasn't super weird to see arcade machines in different like movie theaters, mini putt, pizza joints, like stuff like that. There were still arcade machines around and stuff in a way that there really aren't now. So um I'm sure it was out there. I don't remember when the first time I played it is. I do remember, or not really, remember is not the right word, but I have played it a handful of times in the last couple of years.
Hmm.
Actually at GameWorks, I think, or no, it's level 2-1 something. I don't know, in Schaumburg, but there's like an arcade type thing in the Woodfield Mall in Schaumburg that I
Mm.
played it at recently, and it was really fun. Um, and we're actually, side note, nobody will care about this except for you and I, Ryan, but Cherryvale Mall in Rockford, everything, that mall's dying like most malls in America. I'm really hoping Stranger Things 3 is going to save the mall. We might have talked about this on our Ryan Went to the Mall episode a few weeks ago. But we're getting like a whole like arcade 2-level like arcade bowling thing put into the Cherryvale Mall. Did we talk about this on that episode?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Never mind. Let's move on. Um,
Yeah. One of our malls here has a round one,
okay.
which is an awesome Japanese import arcade. And they have like bowling, and there's karaoke rooms, and a lot of ticket games and stuff, but they also have a lot of like actual like Japanese cabinets of games there, because round one is like a pretty big arcade in Japan. And they have they have a presence here in one of our malls, and that's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. Yeah, cool. Well, that's exciting. Hopefully, maybe this is a trend that's on the rise. The barcades have been coming back, and that's cool, or have been taking off, I guess, in the last decade. But it would be great if the mall arcade, the multi-purpose, multi-format mall amusement experience, arcade experience would take off. I think that'd be awesome. I'm excited about that.
Agreed.
So, all right, let's talk about the actual arcade game, Episode 1 Racer. It rules. It is not the same game as the home console PC version, but I don't know. I was reading about this a little bit this week. I'm not really sure like what the crossover is between Sega and LucasArts. Because LucasArts would develop games at this time, but also it was like a publishing division or whatever that would oversee development from other developers too. And so, LucasArts developed the console, PC, Dreamcast, versions of Racer, and then Sega, and I think it was AM5 is the name of the developer within Sega that did this console version. Or not this arcade version. They developed that one, but they worked with LucasArts, of course, because it was like the LucasArts license and that sort of thing. And like you look at footage of the Boonta Eve race in the arcade game versus the console PC game, and it's not the same, but it's not that different either. You know what I mean? So I kind of wonder like how much crossover there was in terms of the development of this game and the other version of the game. But they are different games.
Yeah. And so this was the AM5 division. Let's see. Actually, Wikipedia has it as AM3, but
okay. All right.
Hitmaker was the name of the developer. And they developed the Star Wars trilogy arcade game as well, that Sega published in the arcades. But they were also the developers behind stuff like Crazy Taxi, Virtual Tennis, Top Skater. So like a lot of these like really big, super cool arcade games, and home console ports and stuff as well. Sega Rally.
I love Virtua Tennis. I love that game. That is like my favorite Dreamcast game. I love it.
So good.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're a great developer for both like arcade games and console games. So they developed Race Arcade in 2000. The cabinet is really cool. Not uncommon for Sega racing games to have a great cabinet, but this one's especially cool.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. The standout thing about the arcade version is that it has the throttle control. So you have two throttles, left and right throttle, and you use those to control the game. And it was just like I said, I just played it a couple of years ago. And sitting down in this cabinet and holding onto these throttles, it's kind of hard to control. But at the same time, like when there'll be moments where you're like, okay, I'm just going to take that left throttle and I'm just going to push it all the way up. Like you feel like Anakin in the movie when he's like, doing the thing. Like it's really cool. It's like hard and, but really fun and just really cool to recreate like even the tactile kind of feeling of controlling a pod racer.
Yeah. This is a super fun game. It's one I play whenever I have a chance. Same with Star Wars Trilogy Arcade. They're ones you don't see super often in the arcades. So it's important if you do see one of these, make sure you play it because it's not in high supply these days.
Yeah, and I'm going to link to, in the show notes, I'm going to link to an article from the International Arcade Museum and Killer List of Video Games at Museum of the Game website. So it's in our show notes, Ryan, but it has a lot of information about the game, and it has like, you can download the manual that like arcade operators would get that came with the game, but there's a lot of photos or a couple photos anyway of the cabinet. And so there's the single player cabinet, which, I've seen more often,
Mhm.
but then there's also there's a dual cabinet that doesn't have the throttle control, it looks like. So I'm not really sure how it works, but maybe it does, but it doesn't look like it has the throttle control. But it's a two-player, cabinet, and it looks fantastic. And there's an Anakin side and a Sebulba side, and so the seat is different if on each side, and then up on top there's like a big sign on each side that says Anakin and Sebulba and has photos of them. And there's a super 90s like graphic like right in the middle at the top that says Pod
Pod
Racing. And
racing.
yeah. So no, the thing is, it looks amazing. So it must have the throttle control, because I don't know how else would it work. But none of these pictures actually am I seeing the throttles like on display like I would expect. So I just must be missing something, because I've definitely done it, but I'm not seeing them here. So I don't know. But yeah, it's awesome, and 100%, like you said, gotta play it if you see it. I think you were telling me sometime recently that there's one. Didn't you think there was one in Beloit or something, or Janesville? Somebody was telling me that there's
Hmm.
a pod racer cabinet up there somewhere. So
Was not me,
oh, okay.
but I think it's something you should investigate.
Yeah. Something else I can investigate that I'm seeing here listed. Where is this? On eBay, for the low price of $150, you can buy a side panel from the Episode 1 Racer arcade machine. And I kind of want it because it has an incredible graphic of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul and Anakin and some pod racers, and it looks great. And then it says Sega at the top, and it's really cool. But
Yeah.
$150. But is that and only $106 shipping? So I mean, like, you're barely over 250 at that point.
Not bad.
Kind of bad, but that would be
Uh,
awesome. That would be awesome to have.
yeah.
As would just an arcade cabinet of Episode 1 Racer, which would also be incredible. So, in another life someday, maybe.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Cool. Well, let's move on to the Game Boy Color version of Episode 1 Racer. Have you ever played this one, Ryan?
I did. I have. I have a copy of it.
Oh, okay.
I think it's awesome.
I do too.
I like this game a lot.
I do too. I do too. I think it's great. It's a would you call it a top-down racer, overhead racer, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah. You in the notes compared it to like RC Pro Ams. I would, I'd take that further and say, like, if you've played Micro Machines on NES or Sega Genesis, it's very that. But as far as like Game Boy, you know, comparisons, I think the original Wave Race is kind of how I always think about it, because it does have like kind of a different feel than like a car racing game, because like Wave Race, it's like jet skis, and this is pod racers, so it's a little bit of a different feel than just straight up cars. But it's a top-down racing game and super fun.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's challenging about this game, or limiting or limited, I guess, about this game, is how little of the track you can view at one time.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's nice that your pod is like nice and big and like looks really cool as far as the design of it goes. But that also means that you can barely see any of the racetrack. So they have to include these arrows like at the top of the screen to say like there's a left turn coming up or there's a right turn coming up. And so that takes some getting used to. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's fun. It's really absolutely a game you can pick up and play for like 10 minutes. I don't want to say max, but like it's not the kind of thing you're gonna sit down and play for 2 hours, because it's just very repetitive and yeah, I don't know. It's pretty limited in what it is, but I just love like the Phantom Menace, Star Wars, that prequel era filtered through 8-bit video game like vibe of this thing. I think that's really cool. And I had put in the notes that it's the closest thing to an 8-bit prequel game we have, and that I think that's really cool. And you pointed out that there is a game for Game Boy called Obi-Wan's Adventures. And boy, if that doesn't sound exciting, and boy, if it doesn't look bad. I've
Oh
never
yeah,
played that,
I
but it
have
looks
not played
awful.
it either. It looks really, really bad.
So I'm
I
gonna
think it was reviewed poorly as well.
oh yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna continue to hold this version of Racer, the Game Boy Color version of Racer, as the example of 8-bit, prequel Star Wars in my mind. So, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And let's see, the structure of this game is that there are 5 planets, and you can race against 4 different racers on each planet. So it's a one-on-one race every time, and you want to try to win. And if you do, then you can race the next racer. And you start out as Anakin, but I think you can play as other racers too at some point. I only played as Anakin when I played it. I don't know, but
Same.
yeah. So basically, yeah, 4 races per planet. And then you race Sebulba at the end of each planet, I think. And if you win Sebulba's pod, which that's something right there.
Mm,
So yeah,
yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. One other feature of this game that, this is I know a lot of people play these games like emulated and stuff these days, but I would make a strong case for buying the cartridge of this and playing it on like an actual Game Boy or like a Game Boy Advance SP or something, because you can it's an oversized cartridge, and you can insert a AAA battery into it for a rumble feature in the game, which is always very cool. There are a lot of games in kind of the second wind of the Game Boy's life cycle, the Game Boy Color era. Stuff like Pokemon Pinball and a few others that had this rumble feature to them, but it's pretty cool, pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, why don't we move on to another Star Wars racing game that I don't know if I'd ever heard of, to be honest with you. I must have at some point, but kind of had forgotten it existed. And this is a PS2 game called Super Bombad Racing, and one that you have, Ryan, and have played like recently, right? Like you were playing it this week.
Yes, I have a complete copy right here. And you can see by the cover, this is a very
Stylized.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yep, there's definitely a style here. Basically, this is like super deformed, giant head, Star Wars Episode 1 racing game. And it's hard to be like, this game kind of sucks. But it's hard to be super critical of it, because it was actually the last game developed by Lucas Learning, which was a spin-off within LucasArts, to make, educational games. And apparently they used like the um, national curriculum, the federal standards for public education as the basis of the games they developed. And it was headed by a an employee, the previous senior vice president of MECC, which was like a huge educational game developer for like PC games back in the day. So like I think like Number Munchers, all of that sort of stuff came from MECC Mech. And so yeah, this was like an edutainment, I think is the word. And so they made games primarily on PC. So stuff like Star Wars Droid Works, Episode 1, The Gungan Frontier, Pit Droids, etc., all on PC. And that was from like 1998 to 2000. And then Super Bombad Racing was their first and only console game. It was a PS2 exclusive, and it was also the last game they developed um, before the studio or the spin-off studio shut down. So there is, like the intention of it was to make something like extremely kid friendly. I, playing it, I struggle to see the educational merits within it, because it is essentially just like a kart racing game. Um, but it was the last game under the Lucas Learning banner, so I guess it's significant in that way. But this was released on April 23rd, 2001. It is entirely episode 1 themed. I was looking through the manual to see if there were like any names I recognized, and Hayden Blackman was the associate voice director, and like Star Wars fans probably know him as like an author of comics and novels within Star Wars. He also, I believe, sort of spearheaded the Force Unleashed project when that was happening. So he, in this case, like this would have been like probably like some of his like earlier time in LucasArts. He was serving the role as associate voice director. And speaking of voices, Jake Lloyd and Ahmed Best appear to voice their characters in the game, which is cool. As far as the game itself, it's fine. It is like a kart racer, so like it's very from the Mario Kart mold. The tracks are pretty full of shortcuts and ramps and stuff like that. It plays okay. I never felt like totally in like I didn't really feel like a strong sense of control. Like when you are playing Mario Kart and like it just feels like supernatural. This game, I just never felt like fully in control. I felt like I'd be, doing stuff and my cart would be, drifting far off to the side or whatever. So it never really felt great, but it's competent, control wise. But it has like items to like attack and get speed burst and that sort of thing. Again, like extremely from that Mario Kart cloth. The I personally am not a huge fan of the art design. It's I find it like really really ugly with these giant heads. I guess like this is like maybe the predecessor to Funko Pops, this art design, but like less thoughtful, I guess. I don't know. It just really kind of rubs me the wrong way, especially the human characters like Anakin and
Obi-Wan looks pretty rough. I mean, Obi-Wan looks like his hair specifically is like really weird.
Yeah, it's really creepy looking, for sure. And the music is don't expect your sort of John Williams score here. It is like, I don't understand what's happening with the music in the game. It sounds like circus music, essentially.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
it's not great. And then, you know, like, I don't know really who. I mean, the audience for this was kids, and I'm sure like some kids definitely got this game. PS2 was the market leader. It didn't have, it, it PS2 really kind of lacked in kart racing games. This was kind of when the genre was on the decline, and basically Mario Kart was the only one really doing it well for a while there. And so I'm sure like a lot of kids ended up with this game, and maybe like, if you played it as a kid, uh, and it was like the only game you had and you love Star Wars, I think that was probably the ideal way to play it. But
So
oh, go
I got to
ahead.
jump in. I got to jump in real quick
Okay.
because you've been trashing this game here, Ryan. And here's the
Okay.
deal: you've played it and I haven't, so you definitely are the authority here. But to
Mm,
me, like I watched some videos of this game, and like everything about it to me screams like this game is for ages like 5 and below. And I have a little guy in the house right now who's 5, and he likes video games, but he can't play like even Mario Kart, which is not a really hard game. He can play it, but unless he puts a lot of time into it, he's not even getting to the point where he can finish, top 5 or whatever.
hmm
And to me, like it's like I think this game, you can tell just sort of like from everything about it, like from the size of the characters and the fonts on screen, like all the text is huge on the screen. And it's like, who designed this UI? Like, why would everything be giant like this? And it's like, oh, well, it's because it's for like really little kids. And then I was like watching a video of the game, and it's like, oh, it almost seems like it's playing itself or something. You know what I mean? It seems so boring and uninspired. But again, I think it's because it's like for really little kids. So not me arguing that like, oh, it's really good or like it's a good game. I haven't even played it, so I don't know. But I feel like it's just one of those things where it really like all the vision, like everything about it is just very strongly hinting or suggesting, anyways, like if you are competent at video games and like an adult or even an older child, like that you're not, it's not for you. It's for like a little kid that wants to just like pick up the thing and feel like, oh, I can do it, And I think everything being so exaggerated, and whether it's like the look of the characters or the sort of like basic design of the course, or the giant fonts on the screen, whatever, even the ridiculous music, I feel like it's all very much
mm,
targeted towards like really little kids, which makes sense being developed by Lucas Learning. So it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, like this is not a doesn't seem like a great Star Wars racing game, or really one that's that worth it for anybody to track down. But I would just say that I bet if I bet it was pretty successful by the standard of like, would a 3 or 4 year old have fun playing this game? You know what I mean? And if that's what they were trying to do, then I feel like it's probably pretty decent at that versus kind of looking at it from the lens of like, I'm 37 years old and I'm gonna pick up this game, and is it fun? Like, well, no, probably not at all. You know what I mean? But if you're 4, I bet it is.
absolutely. That said, like I mentioned earlier, it's also like kind of hard to play, I thought. And
Oh,
maybe it was just because I'm used to other kart racing games, and right now I'm playing Team Sonic Racing on Switch, which is fantastic. But like, I've like maybe I just have like different expectations for like how a kart racing game plays, and maybe that's, you know, if I'm not going into it with that baggage, maybe like this is actually really natural. But like, I don't know, I thought it felt like super off um playing, but maybe it was like designed around like a 5-year-old's reflexes and stuff, and that's like something I can't even, you know. pretend to have. So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. I don't know. Again, that's like you've actually played it, so maybe it is really bad and it's not even good for 5-year-olds. But just like seeing like the way, I don't know, I was just like it almost like it felt like for long stretches you're just going straight, you know what I mean? And like, it's just, I don't know, didn't seem like it had a lot of skill involved. So
yeah. Do you have a PS2?
I think I do have a PS2 somewhere, but
Okay. Well, if you have a PS2, I'll mail you the game and you can give it the kid test
okay. All right.
at
Okay.
home. So let me know. Let me know
All
on
right.
that.
All
And
right.
we can investigate this further.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we move on to the last sort of pod racing focused game on our list here, and really the last game on our list for all intents and purposes. But this one is Star Wars Racer Revenge, and this, of course, is the 2002 sequel to Episode One Racer. And Ryan, do I have to recuse myself from this conversation? I don't know if ethically I can talk about this game or not. No, I'm kidding. But it was developed by Rainbow Studios in Phoenix, Arizona, and my uncle Tom worked at Rainbow Studios at the time this game was developed. He worked there from the mid '90s until I think maybe the mid 2000s or something like that. So he worked on a lot of their games. And Rainbow Studios was a cool studio. They did. Let's see, what did they do? Deadly Tide was the first game I played from them. That was a Windows PC game from 1996. But after that, they did the Motocross Madness games, which took off and I think were thought of pretty well. They did Racer Revenge, of course. Another notable game that I know that you remember, Ryan, and other big Nintendo fans would remember, of course, is Deadly Creatures on the Wii.
Yes.
Really interesting game. And then a ton of motocross and ATV games as well. And they were acquired by THQ at some point in the mid to late 2000s, I think. And so I don't really follow what they do anymore, know too much about them these days. But yeah, for a while there, they were an independent developer in Phoenix, and actually went to the studio when I was younger and stuff. It was cool. So
Wow.
yeah. So, and really cool that for me, like when I was, what I've been 19, 20 years old at the time, is like, oh yeah, there's a new Star Wars game coming out. My uncle worked on it, so
Yeah.
that was cool. Yeah. So someday we got to get him on the podcast to talk about his experience making Star Wars Racer Revenge. But
Absolutely. And I do want to say, like, this is a studio with an awesome resume of racing games. They I just realized when I was doing research for this podcast, they developed the Splashdown games.
oh yeah,
And Splashdown 2, I think, is the closest anyone ever got to making a jet ski game as good as Wave Race. That game is absolutely fantastic.
which,
And
hey, can I just say real quick? My
yeah,
Uncle Tom and Aunt Janet, they actually gifted me Wave Race 64. What would that have been? 96, the year that that N64 came
yeah,
out.
yeah.
They got me that game for Christmas, and it like wasn't really on my radar. And they got it for me, and my Uncle Tom was like, "Yeah, I heard this game's really good," and like it was, of course, amazing. It rules. So
Wow.
yeah. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if he was like, huh, I got this game for my nephew and I should check it out for myself. And then he played it and he was like, oh man, we need to do a jet ski game as good as this.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
they did it with Splashdown 2 in particular. So awesome. Highly recommended.
Yeah, maybe.
But, anyways,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Rainbow Studios, they're a studio that reminds me of something like Sumo Digital, who just have like a really great track record of making like fun arcade racing games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, they did some, I guess, continue to do, but at least at the time did some really good stuff. So, yeah, and okay, but here's the weird thing. So my uncle worked on this game. I had the game on PS2, but I don't remember it that well, and I haven't played it again. Like it's re-released on PS4. It's super weird. I don't know why. Like I haven't bought it and I haven't played it since it's come back out. And yeah, I definitely don't ever play a PS2 anymore. So I bet it's been 15 years at least since I've played Racer Revenge. So I'm gonna let you do the heavy lifting here, Ryan. I just gave
Poor
you the little
choice.
flex on like, hey, my uncle made it, and then
Yeah,
from there
yeah.
on, yeah, I kind of got to let you take the lead here on talking about Racer Revenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think like just bloodlines talking like you're the authority here of that mighty Rainbow Studios blood
Yeah, well,
flows through you.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
but yeah, so basically I rented this game on PS2 back in the day. I never bought it, but I rented it. I enjoyed it. And then I think when I really got into it was um, when it was re-released on PS4 alongside um, Jedi Starfighter and Bounty Hunter when they did those really random re-releases of PS2 games on PS4. And what they kind of did with the games is they added trophies to them and bumped up the resolution to 1080p. Now these PS2 games on PS4, like on paper, sound awesome. Adding trophies for people who are into that, and then higher resolution and I'm assuming quicker load times. Especially considering these are digital games as opposed to like running off a PS2 disc in like the PS2's kind of humble disk drive speed now. And however, like I just kind of started reading about this and seeing it for the first time a few months ago around the Jack and Daxter games that were released. And I saw a lot of complaints about like input lag and hiccups, like frame rate hiccups and stuff like that in these, PS2 on PS4 games. And so that's something to kind of like consider. I hadn't noticed it hugely. And so on episode 1 or Star Wars Racer Revenge, I played quite a bit of it on PS4. I checked today, this morning, and I played some and like checked, my status and stuff. Like I played through the tournament mode completely and ended up with I have 66% of the trophies for the game. Minus some of the ridiculous final ones. So like I've definitely put some time into it. But then I was playing this morning and I did notice, and maybe it was just because I had it in my head from like reading about it somewhat recently, but I did notice there are some there's points where like the frame rate just drops completely and it just like almost like hiccups. And just like there's like a split second where the game just like stops and then keeps going, and it's a little bit weird and off-putting. And I don't think that was there in the original PS2 release. So that's just kind of like a buyer beware type thing. If you just want to like experience this game in the most convenient way possible, yeah, spending $10 on PS4 is most likely the easiest way you can play this game right now. But I think if you really want like a super authentic way to play the game, I would say like buy a PS2 copy and play it on a PS2. So throwing that out there. That said, as I've mentioned multiple times on this podcast, this game's awesome. I love this game a lot. I think it was taking the episode 1 racer concept and structure, and just like, you know, giving it a sequel. And it's a sequel that's just like more. Like, you'll see, like, in the courses in the game, I think for the most part, the courses in episode 1 Racer are very like in line with the film. So you think of like the Buntaeve Classic in the Phantom Menace, and it's like it's a lot of like open stretches. You know, there's going through some like you know, there's a little bit of like threading the needle through some of like the rocky areas and like some dodging and stuff, but you know, when you compare it to other games in the genre, stuff like Wipeout and F-Zero, those courses are um, much more, they're packed much more densely with obstacles, jumps, ramps, you know, loop de loops, like all kinds of crazy stuff in there. And I think Racer Revenge really brings that. You know, it was far enough removed from the film that it didn't really need to be accurate to what pod races look like in the film. So like you're going through like 360-degree tunnels, and there's a lot of like shortcuts and like jumps, and you know, parts where you're doing multiple jumps like across, like above the track and stuff, like as a shortcut. And so I think like the course design in general just got a lot like fuller in this game. And also mechanically, I think this game kind of pushes the, I guess, sub-series forward a bit, in that you now have a boost button. And so like for me, like the easiest comparison is to like Excite Bike on the NES, where you know, you can use the boost, and you have to be smart about it because you can only use it up to a certain point before you overheat. So you can like hold that boost and get that extra kick, but at a certain point, like, you are going to overheat, so you can't use it completely. So you kind of have to like balance when are the best times to sort of use it. So I think that mechanic, and the fact that the courses are a lot more robust and complicated, I think it makes it a different feeling game. I think like comparing it to the original, I would say the original is like more pure and more authentic to the film, but I would say this Racer Revenge is a more robust like sci-fi racing game. So I think like I can appreciate both games on their own merits. But I do think like despite the obvious similarities, I think there are some significant differences between the two games.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember that this game, when it came out, I don't think it was. It definitely didn't make the splash that the first Racer game did. Probably because it wasn't released, you know, during episode 1 mega hype or anything like, you know, like the first Racer was. And then also, I think like the first Racer was a game that was really well loved by a lot of people, and you know, you just detailed some of the ways in which this game's kind of different from that. So the fact that it's not really attached to the movie the same way the first one is, and even if it was, that's not a movie that at that time in 2002 that people would have necessarily been that hyped about it being attached to anyway, I guess you'd say, like to a certain extent, you know, it was Phantom Menace fever in May of '99. So when a game comes out that summer that is like really authentic to that movie, that's exciting. But you know, 3 years later or whatever, I don't know how exciting that is to people anymore. And then also just like you were saying, you know, in some ways it's pretty different from the first one. And so I think a lot of people probably were expecting maybe something closer to the original, or maybe just had moved on anyway. So I know it didn't make kind of the same splash, and it's not as well thought of, I guess, as the original Racer. But yeah, it's cool to hear that. Maybe just a little different perspective on it. You can kind of appreciate a lot of the unique qualities of this game versus the first one.
Yep. I absolutely think it's something that if you haven't played the game, heeding my warning from earlier, there are literally only two ways to play this game. You can play it a PS2 copy or you can play it on PS4. It's not something that's there's not even a PC version.
Right.
So I think keep that in mind, but I definitely think it's a game worth checking out, worth experiencing. I think I think racing games, especially arcade style racing games, age really well if they're good. And obviously this game isn't going to look as good as like a modern game, but I still think like gameplay wise, it holds up. I will say, like, once again, playing it this morning, it did kind of support my view that I stated earlier that playing pod racing games just feels the best on the N64.
Yeah.
Like that's because like I was playing on PS4 this morning and like PS4 has like a good controller and stuff. Like super way more advanced than the N64's controller, but it's still just like I just didn't have that like that connection that I got from playing within playing Racer 1 with the N64 controller. So
right.
Yeah. But very, very good game. One, like if you've slept on it, like definitely check it out one way or another. I know you can get complete copies of it on PS2 for probably about the same price that you'd pay for the digital copy on PS4. And I believe this is one of the games that Limited Run is re-releasing.
Might be. Yeah.
On PS4.
Yeah.
So
probably because I think they were doing everything pretty much that was like, on PS4. Anything that was like easily where they don't have to develop like the game or, port the game or whatever.
Yeah.
They were doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So this, and also something worth noting, Hayden Christensen does the voice for Anakin Skywalker, and this game was released February 11th, 2002. So it would have been released before the best Star Wars movie ever, Attack of the Clones. So this would have been our first real product with Hayden Christensen playing Anakin Skywalker, correct?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
So little cool piece of Star Wars lore there, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
One last thing about this game, we mentioned the difference between like the PC Dreamcast versions of Racer compared to the N64 version, and kind of lamented or appreciated the lack of music in the N64 game. This game definitely has music. It definitely has all those variations on those John Williams tunes, but it also has announcers, which makes it really fun as well to have, pod play-by-play pod racing announcing, as you're racing. So that's a pretty fun addition.
Nice, cool. Okay, well let's talk about just quickly here, Ryan, the newest, the most recent Star Wars racing game, which is Star Wars Resistance Racer on the Disney Now app on your phone. So it's more like an applet, I guess, the game. It's like nested within this Disney Now app. But I don't know. I think it's pretty fun. I mean, it's super, super basic, like a kind of a Flash, style, like a browser type game or whatever. Which I don't know. I don't think you can play it on a web browser like on a computer. Probably not. But yeah, it's on your phone if you download the Disney Now app, and you can play as either Kaz or Tam, and you race through a couple of circuits, kind of similar to Episode 1 Racer in the sense that there's multiple circuits, or I guess kind of similar to probably basically every racing game. But there's a couple circuits that you go through, and they're on different. The environments are different. I think they're all in Castellan, but like the second or third circuit, it's like dusk, and the first one looks just like very much like the early races in season 1 of Resistance. But yeah, you can play as Kaz or Tam, and you can customize your racer, which is pretty cool. Customize the look, and then you can earn like engine and wing upgrades as well. And ultimately, you can unlock an X-wing to race with, which I've not done yet. I'm thinking maybe you have to get to the Dameron Extreme Cup, which is the last circuit. Yes, the last circuit is the Dameron Extreme Cup. I think you have to get to that one. But yeah, I played it for, I don't know, I probably played for half hour, 45 minutes yesterday or something like that. I did a couple circuits, and it's a one finger, one hand control game. You just put your thumb on the bottom of the screen, and then you kind of just move left and right or whatever to control the ship. And if you lift your thumb off the screen, it pauses. So it's like one of those things where you just put your thumb down, and you just use your thumb to kind of control the ship. And there's power ups you can collect along the way, and it's not super difficult, but it's basically you're racing against, sort of like the Game Boy Color game. You're racing against one other racer, and you're trying to get to the finish line before they do, obviously. And there are obstacles that you can hit, not that you can hit, but that you will hit if you don't watch out for them, and those slow you down. And you only have a certain number of shields, and you can pick up shield upgrades like while you're racing. But I think it's like basically how many times you can get hit before you lose or whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, it's got like voice acting from, well, I shouldn't say voice acting, voice clips from the actors in the movie or in the show. Probably stuff they just pulled from the episodes, and it didn't really sound like they came in and recorded custom dialogue for the game, but maybe. But yeah, as far as like recreating the whole, kind of vibe and stuff of Resistance, it's does a pretty good job of that. And again, I think it's aimed at kids. It's within the Disney Now app, for heaven's sake, Ryan. But for what it is, I think it's for what it is, I think it's pretty fun. So I would check that out if you get the chance.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't given it a download, but I mean, we did say that we wanted a Resistance racing game when we wished on that monkey paw.
I think we did, and didn't I think we did, and didn't we even say we wanted it to be like Star Fox sort of or something? Did we say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you're going through rings in this game, like you have to navigate through rings and stuff. So
yeah,
boy, what if they would just kind of extrapolate on this idea and do like a full console, like full on game version of it would be really cool. Because even like the visuals are great, but they're pretty. I mean, I guess in comparison to the high res textures in the N64 version of Episode 1 Racer, they're pretty mega high res. But on your phone screen, it's like, they're a little fuzzy, and because it looks just like the show, but it's not super high res or anything. So because again, it's like within this other app, and I'm sure they don't want to use up a ton of data to create a super high res looking thing. But I mean, other than that, it really does look just like the show. So it's pretty cool from that angle or whatever. But it's just, they could make such a gorgeous like console game if they put a little bit of resources into it and wanted to make like a legit like actual racing game based around Resistance. It could easily look fantastic, and and it could be really fun. but I don't think that's in the cards. So we'll have to settle for this, and it is kind of neat, I guess, for just a little thing to try out. I'll probably keep playing and try to win the Dameron Extreme Cup. Just because that seems like a fun thing to do.
Well, so, keep us updated on the show, on your progress.
Yes, I will do that. That'll be a new weekly segment.
the quest for the Dameron Extreme Cup.
Yes, yeah. Well, if I get the Dameron, if I win the Dameron Extreme Cup, I don't know if I'll talk about it on the show, but I will maybe I'll post it on Twitter at least, maybe even to our YouTube channel, a video of the Dameron Extreme Cup. So we'll see what happens.
Nice.
So yeah. But I think that's going to do it for episode 111 here of the Blockade Runner podcast. We've hit all of the Star Wars racing games that I know of. So if we missed any, let us know. And you could do that by emailing us at blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com, or you could follow us on Twitter at Blockade Run and let us know there. Ryan, you are on Twitter
at Brawn Dwarf, BRAWNDWARF.
And you can, kind of find everything else we do at our website, which is blockaderunnerpodcast.com. So we'll be back next week with more Star Wars chat here. And until then, thanks for watching or listening, and we'll catch you soon.